at the Cloud Foundry Summit in Boston, and today we have with us Melissa from Cloud Foundry and Linux Foundation. So Melissa, can you quickly tell us what do you do at Cloud Foundry and Linux Foundation?
Sure. So my name is Melissa Logan. I've been at the Linux Foundation for almost 6 years now. I started when it was just Linux before we launched any of these collaborative projects that exist today. I helped launch the Open Daylight SDN project, which was our first collaborative project. Now we have over 150, maybe even more today. I started working on the Cloud Foundry Foundation side a couple years ago. And there I focus on ecosystem and digital marketing.
Mm-hmm. So when you chose to work with Cloud Foundry, are you like interested in technology, or it was just like, oh, I have to do this work?
Yeah, I think at Linux Foundation, the fun thing about working there is that you can work on different types of projects. So I started with Open Daylight. I worked in automotive. I worked in a few other ones in the networking space. And then came over to Cloud Foundry on the cloud computing side because these are interesting times for cloud.
Right. A lot of things are happening in this space either way.
Indeed.
So what are the things that you do at Cloud Foundry?
So focusing on open source, building kind of an open source ecosystem as we can around Cloud Foundry. So we have about 65 members of Cloud Foundry. We have 8 certified distributions. Each of those distributions has their own ecosystem. Of course, they're building that on their own. What we try to do is kind of aggregate the ecosystem and bring it together so that people who are looking into Cloud Foundry, end users across the spectrum, can come to our website and say, oh, okay, well, here's what it looks like. Here's the kind of distribution I might get. Here are the IaaS providers that work with Cloud Foundry, with multi-cloud. Here are the services and integrations that there exist on all the different distros, as well as here are the consulting and integrators that I could turn to implement Cloud Foundry, however they want to do that. So we started with about 600 entries in our database for the ecosystem back in October. And we just recently announced that there are over 5,000 there today. So we've taken a lot of steps to grow this pretty significantly in the past 6 months.
Right. Cloud Foundry predates Docker containers. Everybody talks about containers. So, and you have been associated with Linux Foundation for such a long time. So, how do you see the evolution of these technologies, and what new challenges that you face in your capacity?
There are other cloud technologies within the Linux Foundation. So CNCF is housed there as well, that hosts Kubernetes among many others.
It's called Linux of the cloud world.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. And so, it's been interesting to just in open source, this is kind of how it goes, where you see all these different technologies coming up in different communities. We saw the same thing in networking, in fact. And the networking side, Open Daylight was one of the first open source networking projects that existed ever. And after that, there's been a cascade of them. So multiple projects in the networking space. And what you saw Linux Foundation announce last year in networking was a Linux, I think it's Linux Foundation networking fund that kind of brings all of these together. So there's now like 12 or 15 open source projects at Linux Foundation, and they're kind of housed under this umbrella org within the Linux Foundation. So I'm curious if we'll see us going in the same direction for cloud as well, because we have CNCF, we have Cloud Foundry, there are multiple things under CNCF. There's got to be some kind of space for us to come together. And here at Cloud Foundry Summit, you see a lot of talk about Cloud Foundry and Kubernetes and how we can integrate these things. That's what everybody's talking about here.
Right. What are the other things that you're interested in beyond hardcore tech, or others, either maybe social issues related to technologies or the field you work in?
Yeah, I think something that's very near and dear to Cloud Foundry is diversity and inclusivity in our community and in the broader tech industry. And as a foundation, there's only so much we can do. Obviously, there's a lot of players here. There's a lot of people, members who, we don't pay the FTEs who work on Cloud Foundry. We have 65 members who do that. So there's only so much we can do, but we really care about how can we make this as welcoming and inclusive of a community as possible. We have codes of conduct. We can, enforce those codes of conduct. That's really important to us. But what else can we do? So this is something that we're trying to gather information on right now. How can we create a framework to bring more people into tech, so women and underrepresented minorities, and make this a place where they feel welcome, but also they can find places to advance and grow and become the next, future leaders of technology. You see kind of the disparity in gender and underrepresented minorities as the higher you get, there's more of a disparity. So it's starting, from younger people bringing them in, but how do you kind of also promote them and get them to the top levels as well? This isn't something we can solve at Cloud Foundry, but we are passionate about figuring this out and are always looking to partner with other communities and organizations to do this. After we come back from Cloud Foundry Summit, we really want to sit down and see if we can come up with a framework to start somewhere.
Okay, that was about Cloud Foundry. I'm talking about you in particular. Are you also either involved with or planning or something on the same lines?
Yeah, I think so I actually have a side project that I started creating after Cloud Foundry Summit last fall in Basel, when the Me Too news was coming out. We kept hearing all these stories about, these men being held accountable for all these things that they were doing. And I started working on a side project, kind of, fueling all this energy into how can we actually make this better. And so there's a project that called sexismfieldguide.com, and it's over 100 tactics of how people can identify and confront sexism. So all forms of sexism. So not just, in tech, or not just, one type of sexism, but anything from like a microaggression or gendered language or bias or any of these things. And trying to, bring different tactics together that people can use, whether you're like an introvert or an extrovert. We're trying to kind of bring everything together. And it's also, open source in a way where anybody can contribute their ideas to it as well and rate the tactics. Did this work or did it not? So really it's trying to just provide tools for people who want to identify and confront this.
Right. And this project is already there out there. Okay, live.
Yeah. Just just kind of put it out in the universe in February with no fanfare really, and been sharing it with different women in tech groups that I'm involved in, and Cloud Foundry and this kind of thing, and it's gotten some traction, and we'll see where it goes.
And so, what kind of community are you trying to build around this project? How can other people help you?
I think right now it's still very early days. I'm trying to figure out where to go with this. Right now, I would love if people would just wanted to read it and use it and give feedback. That would be really useful. Is it working? What could be better?
Right.
Even contributing tactics that they've used that have been successful. That would be great. Let's start somewhere, and then let's figure out if it is useful for people, how do we make it bigger? How do we make the conversation bigger? Not just between us and between, that person and the person they're confronting, but how can we make this kind of a bigger conversation in companies? That's kind of where, hopefully it'll evolve to eventually.
Right. And we were like, before we came for the interview, we were watching Jennifer's, film there. And one of the questions from a media person came up, but I want to, but further, as journalists, we often, approach companies or organizations for inputs or questions. And as you, as part of Cloud Foundry, do you think that journalists can also play a role, like where, how can journalists help?
Yes, absolutely, I do. And I think when we think about Me Too or sexism or harassment or all the things that are happening, the problem is that we're not having these conversations. Once a year, you might sit down and watch a video at your workplace about sexual harassment, and they're kind of hokey videos, and you might check a box that say, yes, I watched it. But then what? And these companies are still having lawsuits and still having issues, and you still have all these things because we can't just do it once a year and then forget about it. We have to make talking about these issues part of our culture in a way that's not scary. And how do we do that? I think the media can play a role in that. How can you help frame the conversation around sexism, or frame some of these issues, one, just to make people aware of them, and two, to kind of like diffuse the fear or anger or any of the emotions that people have, even indifference about this. So I think you do have a role to play, which is you have to be having these conversations alongside all the other conversations you're having about your industry.
Right. But sometimes a lot of publications are trade kind of magazines. They just want to talk about technology, not the culture.
I mean, the question is, if it's just a trade magazine, they only want to talk about one thing. I understand that. I think, you can't separate tech from humans, though,
Right.
because humans create technology.
Right.
We create technology. We use technology. This is how technology is built. You can't separate these two things.
Right, but that company may be their sponsor, and then
Sure.
it will create a conflict. So
Sure.
there are a lot of factors that play a role in the, what I was curious
Yeah,
about,
yeah.
like when we, as a journalist, we approach companies for
Right.
inputs.
Gotcha.
Does it help if we deliberately ask, hey, do you have any women, who can respond to this question instead of getting a male?
Right.
So that just to get more faces.
Yes, and I think that's great. In fact, I read this article. I don't remember the source. I think it was an Atlantic writer. And he was saying, I wanted to understand if I was actually being biased in my interviews, because he worked in a science field, and I can't recall the details, but it was some science field. And what he did is he went back and looked at a year's worth of interviews and tried to see how many women versus men. Did you see this? It was very eye-opening,
Right.
and for him. And he was saying, I can't believe I thought I was interviewing a lot of women. What happened is there was only 20% or something, very low number. And so he took it upon himself to make sure to, first of all, build his database of women in the field that he could go to at any point. And one of the hurdles that he found is once he started to go out and reach out to these people, that he basically had to convince the women that they were smart enough and
Right.
had the expertise to do this, because women often don't feel like they are the expert.
Right.
And so that was a hurdle as he kind of did this. And so now he said, I've gone from like 20 or 30 to maybe 50 or 60. It's still not
yes.
great, but it's still not
Better than
quite.
already.
It's better than it was. But the intention behind that is really important, because you can fix this problem. You have to understand that there's a problem, and then you can find the data around this problem, and you have to be intentional about it.
Right.
And to bring it back to Cloud Foundry, we're very intentional about this as well. So if you look at our keynote stage,
Yes, three women and 2 men. That was perfect.
yes.
Yes.
And we are very intentional about that, because we want to bring up, lift people up and make sure that we can have as much parity as possible.
Right.
We can't solve everything, but
But
that
we
is
can
something we have control over, and so we do that very intentionally.
Anyway, it was nice talking to you Lisa, today.
Thank
we'll
you.
catch up next time when we have
Sounds
more
good.
time, and we'll talk about a lot of things and your
Perfect.
secret project.
Sounds good.
Thank you.
Thank you.